Howdy. We are back with the Turbo E34. Pretty exciting day. I took inventory of a new turbo. This one is a Garrett GTW 3684. It's basically Garrett's competitor to Precision's 6262, which is a pretty popular turbo for this platform. The one that's currently in the car is the Garrett 60-1, which I got for a good price new. It's a pretty old turbo. It's not very efficient. It's good if you want to run maybe 1 bar or 14-ish pounds of boost max. But after that, it starts to get pretty inefficient. And if you're not running E85 like me, like you're running pump, which is what I do, you start to get knock limited. And the original goal for this car was to get around 500 wheel horsepower reliably. The motor should be set up to do that, but this current turbo is not. So finally took the plunge and got this guy. It doesn't look quite a bit bigger, but the compressor wheel and turbine wheel is actually quite a bit bigger. I don't know the specs entirely between the two off the top of my head, but this one is a pretty decent size, relatively speaking. Given that I was going up in size, I wanted to maintain some of the spool for drivability, so I got the dual ball bearing version. The caveat to that is that we have coolant ports here. So it's a water-cooled turbo compared to the 60-1, which is a journal bearing. It's just lubricated and cooled with oil. Oil isn't that great of a coolant. Water and coolant is a very good coolant, so I'm hoping that switching to this should put a little less strain on the oil itself too. The oil shouldn't get as hot. I think that's accurate, but we'll see. So I'm gonna go ahead and I need to pop off this intake manifold so I can take the throttle body lines. I currently have those teed together. They normally run to the throttle body and prevent it from freezing over, which isn't a very common occurrence anyways, but nice of BMW to give us some coolant lines there, because that is going to be the lines for this turbo. So I'm gonna go ahead and start ripping stuff apart, and once I'm done, hopefully it doesn't get too late, but we will take it for a test drive and see what happens. I'm still waiting on a new air filter. That Spectre air filter that I have is kind of cheap and is known to get sucked into the turbo, and now that I'm going to be sucking even more air than that other turbo, I kind of want to get a filter that's more up to the task, because I do not want to break this. So, with that being said, here's a time lapse. So the first portion of this turbo swap is taking the intake manifold off, so that's what you see me doing here. If I were just replacing the previous turbo with another one that only had oil ports on it, my motor is already set up to do that, since the old one is set up like that. So I wouldn't have needed to take the intake manifold off, but because the new one is a water-cooled turbo and it needs water coolant lines to it, I had to take the intake manifold off. I'm tapping into the throttle body lines that would normally go to the throttle body to prevent it from freezing, and I'm basically taking those disconnecting them, running one of them to the turbo, blocking off the port in the head with just an additional sensor, a coolant temp sensor that I had sitting around. You could use anything, basically. You could just use something to block it off, whatever's the right thread pitch and size. And then the other coolant line for the turbo is going to the drain plug on the side of the block. So just a minute ago you saw me take the fuel pump fuse out. That's when the door opened and the camera shifted. I took the fuel pump fuse out and then basically tried to start the car and let it run for just a split second. The fuel pump isn't running, so it pushes all the fuel pressure outside of the fuel rail so that I don't run into issues there. So here I've got the intake manifold off. I'm basically just taking the old fitting out of the head, putting that old sensor that I had sitting around into the same port so that coolant doesn't flow out of there anymore, since I'm only using one of the throttle body lines. Now moving over to the turbo, take the turbo blanket off, filter's already off. At this point I'm basically just getting the turbo disconnected, taking the manifold nuts off of the studs, disconnecting the downpipe, taking the oil lines off, so I can get that turbo out of there. So here we've got the old turbo out. This is a time lapse, and I thought I was going to show these on camera for a little bit longer, but it's basically the old turbo compared to the new turbo. For all the welders and fabricators out there, you're probably laughing watching. This is actually the first time I had to do anything with exhaust piping. I bought the welder with the intention of using it for something like this, but this is actually the first use case I've had to utilize my welder with an exhaust. So if you see me doing something silly, you can let me know. There's probably better ways to measure stuff. My cut got a little screwed up. But it works. So, I have the intake manifold off. The new turbo is sort of test fit here. I have the intake manifold off because I need to run some coolant lines. They shipped me the wrong barb, so that's going to have to wait till tomorrow. But the new turbo does fit in there. I was just mocking up some stuff. I extended my downpipe a little The welds are not that pretty, but I don't weld that often, and it should work. It looks like it'll hold. It's a little sugaring on the inside, but that's cool. It fits perfectly, which is awesome. So I'm gonna wrap this with some more heat wrap. Put the downpipe back in. Probably won't tighten down the turbo so that I can get to these water lines tomorrow. I might just call it a night after that. It is about 11:30, so made some good progress. It should be able to be finished up fairly quickly tomorrow, and then we'll get it on the road. Day 2 of our swap. Just ran to the hardware store and got the fitting. I don't know where it went. There it is. Ran to the hardware store, got 3/8 to 3/8 barb. They forgot to give that to me. They gave me this guy, which is a barb to like an AN fitting. I don't really know what size. Maybe they were telling me I should have used stainless lines. Anyways, I have this very janky throttle coolant hose bypass that I had before. It just went to the head. I put a spare sensor that I had in this port, and I'm going to be popping this off, put that barb on, and I think I'm going to run this coolant hose kind of where this oil feed line is and just run it up. I've heard of people running it under the oil pan, but I think that is an E36 thing, and I don't really want to do that. Sounds a little sketchy having the coolant that close to the ground. So I'm gonna hook up those coolant lines, tighten everything down, and put it all back together. I made a mess immediately. I've been putting my GoPro on these mirrors, and then I have a charging cable in there that on the driver's side. Yesterday I ran it through the window because I already had it down. So I put the key in and turned it to accessory, which primes the fuel pump because the fuse is still in, and my fuel feed is right here. I just watched it shoot a bunch of fuel just right out onto here. That's okay. We're not going to be starting for a while. I did get the window down about an inch, so. Now at this point, I'm going ahead and measuring out my new water lines for the turbo. These actually turned out, I knew that I had bought push lock fittings, but I'd never actually used them before. They sort of just looked like normal barbed fittings to me that would use a hose clamp. I found out that that wasn't the case, and it took me a while to kind of figure out how a push lock fitting can be coerced into going into a rubber hose. I ended up using a heat gun and some lithium grease and a lot of force, as you can see from that clip right there, but it sounds like you could basically hang from the fitting from the hose and it would not pull out, so I'm pretty confident in those. I had to capture this. This was when I was under the car. My dad decided to say hi to the camera. And at this point, everything is basically bolted on. Just kind of giving a little walkthrough of what it looks like. You can see the water line going up through the intake manifold and over to the turbo. The other one is hiding underneath. It took me a while to figure out how to clock it correctly. You're supposed to have it at a 20-degree from horizontal orientation for a thermal siphoning effect. I ended up being able to do that. I clocked it the opposite way that I would have expected, but it worked out. So here we go for our first start. yeah, it's right now it's a slower spool up, which is to be expected. I obviously haven't played with the timing much. I had it really conservative with the other turbo. I want to make sure I'm not burning oil or something with the new fittings. It spools up slower. I may be able to play with the timing and get it to spool up a little bit quicker. I'm not really sure where or how quick it's supposed to spool up, but now that I'm not, hopefully not, super knock limited, I'll be able to play with that and make it slightly more aggressive. I'll be fixing is kind of subjective. I'm going to be changing from the screamer pipe to, I'm going to reroute that screamer pipe back into the exhaust. This manifold that I have is very prone to boost creep because of the way that the wastegate pipe is routed. It's sort of at a 90 degree. So I've been fighting with boost creep. Part of the reason that I went to a different turbo is that I thought maybe it would help. It definitely sounds different. I'm gonna have to get used to it. It's also very nice because it doesn't scream at you immediately. So it's been almost a week since I installed the new turbo, and I can pretty confidently say that it was an awesome upgrade. Initially, I didn't like the difference in spool. I think that was just, it was different than before. The new turbo is obviously quite a bit bigger than the old one, which is a good thing. So my engine can breathe a little bit better. The spool did take maybe a day to get used to, so I'm not able to just put my foot down and have it spool up immediately, which isn't the end of the world. It's the reason I went with the ball bearing instead of a journal bearing. I knew that it was going to be slower, but when it does spool up, you can tell it moves a lot more air, which I am a big fan of. It feels better. I've been playing around with the tune a little bit, and it seems to like it more. I don't have to be so conservative with my timing because the turbo is actually capable of efficiently pushing as much pressure as I'm making it push, which really isn't much, but the old turbo wasn't really up to that task. So all in all, great upgrade. I'll get some clips of it actually spooling up here in a few minutes. So yeah, I'll be doing a video on switching from the screamer pipe to a rerouted wastegate dump. So I'll have a video on that soon, so be on the lookout for that. Probably said, what the hell? That sounded nice. Yeah. Everybody thinks, oh, look at this thing. Yeah.